of the biggest communication mistakes people make is assuming conversations are difficult because of the topic itself, but that's rarely the reason why. Usually, conversations become emotionally heavy because they were delayed too long. At the beginning, most issues are relatively manageable. There is still emotional openness, curiosity, and enough trust underneath the relationship for people to speak honestly before tension has had time to grow. But once communication starts being avoided, something else quietly begins happening underneath the surface. People start filling silence with interpretation. They begin replaying interactions in their head, analysing the tone, questioning the intentions, and building emotional narratives around conversations that have never actually happened directly. And eventually, the emotional weight surrounding the issue becomes much heavier than the issue itself ever needed to be. That's why avoided conversations rarely stay small. They accumulate emotional pressure over time. Most people avoid difficult conversations for understandable reasons. They want to protect their stability, they don't want to create conflict, they hope the issue resolves itself naturally or becomes less emotionally uncomfortable if they wait long enough. And in the moment, avoidance can feel relieving. You postpone the conversation and temporarily avoid the emotional discomfort associated or attached to it. But emotionally unresolved tension rarely disappears, simply because it's ignored. It stays present underneath interactions in subtle ways. Most people interpret silence through fear, insecurity, or frustration rather than generosity. Emotional accumulation nobody notices. One unresolved issue rarely stays isolated emotionally. That's what makes delayed communication so complicated. At first, it's one uncomfortable conversation that didn't happen. Then another small frustration appears and goes unaddressed. Then another, and eventually people stop reacting only to the present moment. Now they're reacting to layers of accumulated emotional tension that were never properly resolved earlier. This is why some conversations suddenly feel emotionally disproportionate. A relatively small issue creates a surprisingly large emotional reaction because emotionally the conversation is carrying far more weight underneath it than anyone openly acknowledges. And many misunderstand that moment. They assume the reaction is rational, but often it's cumulative. People are responding not only to the current issue, but months of emotional build-up attached to unresolved communication patterns. And the longer that continues, the more emotionally exhausting communication starts becoming. One thing I've noticed repeatedly in healthy conversations or communications is that clarity almost always creates more emotional stability than avoidance does, even when the conversation itself feels uncomfortable initially, because clarity allows people to stop guessing and uncertainty to settle. It allows people to understand where they stand emotionally instead of constantly interpreting silence, distance, or behavioral shifts. And honestly, I think many people dramatically underestimate how emotionally exhausting uncertainty becomes over time. Not knowing where you stand with someone creates constant emotional calculations. You start monitoring the tone, the timing, the reactions, instead of simply communicating naturally. And eventually, relationships, teams, and partnership become emotionally heavier than they need to be because too much communication is happening indirectly instead of honestly. Avoidance can temporarily delay discomfort, but clarity usually creates long-term stability. Difficult conversations require emotional regulation. One reason difficult conversations go badly so often is because people enter them already emotionally overloaded. By the time the conversation finally happens, usually accumulated frustrations, resentment, defensiveness, and emotional exhaustion underneath it. At once, emotional intensity becomes too high. Communication quality drops dramatically. People stop listening fully. They interrupt more quickly, react more defensively, focus on protecting themselves emotionally instead of understanding each other clearly. That's why healthy, difficult conversations require emotional regulation, not just communication skills. Being able to tolerate discomfort calmly changes everything. Being able to hear something difficult without immediately escalating emotionally changes everything. Because emotionally, safe communication does not mean conversations never become uncomfortable. It means discomfort does not automatically become emotional instability. And many relationships improve dramatically once people stop treating discomfort itself as danger. Most conversations are not difficult because honesty itself is destructive. They become difficult because honesty was delayed long enough for emotional tensions to quietly accumulate underneath it. And often, the conversation people are afraid of having today would have been much smaller, simpler, and healthier if it had happened earlier. Comment below, what have you been avoiding that would actually change something? Don't forget to hit the like button, the bell for notifications, and subscribe to TIDAL Coach so you can join a community that's redefining what modern leadership looks like.